Yes friends, now let us start with the last part of supply, which is not supply, and thereafter we will be discussing nature of supply, that is a separate subject matter. Now supply was equal to actual supply that we have discussed plus deemed supply, which had two parts, part 1 and part 2, that we have done with, and the last part is not supply. Not supply has also got two parts, part 1 and part 2. So now we are entering into that last part of supply of actual supply plus deemed supply minus not supply, and now we are going to discuss about not supply, which has got two parts, part 1 and part 2, part 1 and part 2. So now we are going to discuss about part 1 of not supply, part 1 of not supply, right? Friends, if you recollect the bird's eye view of supply, at that point of time I said that part 1 of not supply is nothing but notified activities or transactions either undertaken by any person or at times specifically undertaken by government. So totally when you talk about those notified activities or transactions, they are 2 plus 3. 2 notified activities or transactions of any person and 3 notified activities or transactions of government. I'll repeat, my friends, we are now discussing the first part of not supply, and in the first part there are few notified activities or transactions that are neither supply of goods nor supply of services. Now how to bifurcate that notified activities or transactions? Bifurcate that into 2 plus 3. Again back to mathematics. This mathematics will make you quite comfortable, or in understanding the simplicity would be more, right? Now why we are dividing that into 2 plus 3? Because the first two notified activities or transactions can be undertaken by any person and it would not be treated as supply, whereas the last 3 notified activities or transaction should have been undertaken by government for it to be called as neither supply of goods nor supply of services. Now focusing on the first 2 notified activities or transactions which are undertaken by any person. Now for that we have to take an example, right? Let us make it quite simple. Let us understand a scenario. Again we are talking about, say, scenario 1, right? We are focusing on that notified activities or transactions which can be undertaken by any person. Scenario 1. Now what is happening in scenario 1? Let us assume that you are talking about Reliance Limited. Reliance Limited in Delhi wants to take its goods to its branch office Reliance Limited in Maharashtra, right? Obviously when you're talking about this particular movement of goods, so the goods are going to go in a truck. You're talking about the goods are going to go in a truck where Reliance Limited Delhi will give the goods to Reliance Limited Maharashtra, right? Now assume that that particular movement is undertaken by a logistics company, right? Now that logistic company, let us assume or call it as, say, VRL Logistics, right? You're talking about VRL Logistics company which is going to take the goods. Now when you talk about the movement of goods, now what will be there when you're talking about the goods? You have actually 3 things to be discussed. First thing, you're talking about the goods inside the truck which belongs to Reliance Limited Delhi and it is willing to take it to Reliance Limited Maharashtra. The second is you are talking about the truck itself, right? And the third is you are talking about the spare parts which may be there along with the truck. So you are talking about the spare parts which may be there along with the truck. There may be certain spare parts which are there along with that truck. Now, let us understand each and every aspect of that. Now, when you talk about movement of goods by Reliance Limited Delhi to Reliance Limited Maharashtra, you are using VRL logistics. First, let us discuss about the goods. Now, what happens with the goods? Now, when you talk about this goods, it is nothing but deemed supply of goods. Deemed supply of goods. Why? Deemed supply of goods by virtue of what? By virtue of para 2 of schedule 1, where you are talking about supply of goods or services between related person and distinct person. And it is very obvious that when you are talking about Reliance Limited Delhi and Reliance Limited Maharashtra, they happen to be distinct person, isn't it? They are all distinct person. Why Reliance Limited Delhi and Reliance Limited Maharashtra distinct person? Because they are located in different states and obviously they would have taken separate registration. It is mandatory the moment you are working in multiple states, right? Two of your branches are there in two states, say Delhi and Maharashtra, you should take 2 GST number, 2 GST IN, right? So we have already discussed that. Now it will be deemed supply of goods for whom? This would be deemed supply of goods for whom? This would be deemed supply of goods for Reliance Limited. For Reliance Limited. Now, the issue is not about Reliance Limited deemed supply of goods. When I tell deemed supply of goods, Reliance Limited Delhi will give what? Reliance Limited Delhi is going to give what? Reliance Limited Delhi is going to give a tax invoice. So, it is going to give a tax invoice. So, that tax invoice will be accompanying that. So, there will be a tax invoice. There will be a tax invoice given by Reliance Limited Delhi to Reliance Limited Maharashtra. So, that is not at all a problem. Reliance Limited Delhi will pay output tax and Reliance Limited Maharashtra will take input tax credit of the same. So, that is not at all an issue. Now, the issue is for whom? The entire issue is for VRL Logistics. Even when you talk about VRL Logistics, when it is taking the truck and the goods, right? You are talking about truck and the goods, obviously truck spare parts, within inside that it is goods. So for goods there is no issue because we are talking about Reliance Limited Delhi to Reliance Limited Maharashtra. Now even when you are talking about trucks and spare parts of VRL Logistics is also having its branch in Delhi and its branch in Maharashtra. And for VRL Logistics, that truck and spare parts are nothing but goods. Mind you, by the way, goods includes capital goods. Goods includes capital goods. So you have to remember that. So goods includes capital goods. Don't worry, we are going to take that definition in your input tax credit chapter, where you have a very simple definition. Goods will include capital goods. Goods are always including capital goods. Now that is not the problem. The major problem happens to be what? VRL Logistics. For VRL Logistics also, when it is taking the truck from Delhi to Maharashtra, where it is having branches in both the states, for them also it becomes deemed supply of goods. Deemed supply of goods. Now the goods involved are truck and spare parts. Truck and spare parts. Now this issue comes to whom? This issue is faced by whom? This issue is faced by VRL Logistics. Now VRL Logistics tells that for us we are having a big problem because we cannot pay GST on truck and spare parts just because the truck and spare parts have moved from one state to another state, in spite of the fact that technically it is also deemed supply of goods. There's nothing wrong. For them also it is deemed supply of goods. When I'm telling about deemed supply of goods, even for them it is deemed supply of goods in terms of the same para 2 schedule 1, same logic. But understand that first of all, VRL Logistics was involved in supplying services, transportation services, on which it is going to pay GST, right? Right, when you're talking about GTA, GST is applicable. It may be forward charge or reverse charge, that is a separate matter, but GST is there. But now the concern is what? The concern is not transportation service. The concern is VRL Logistics is asked to pay GST on what? Is asked to pay GST on truck and spare parts. So when you talk about the Reliance company, there is absolutely no issues for them. They are ready to pay GST on that deemed supply of goods. Reliance Limited Delhi will pay output tax, and Reliance Limited Maharashtra will take input tax credit, because they want to keep the track of that particular goods, and from Maharashtra goods will be sold. But it does not happen the same thing with the friends, with the truck and spare part, my friends. What happens? That truck will go from, say, Delhi to Maharashtra. So if you take this logic, VRL will pay output tax in Delhi on trucks and spare parts, and take input tax credit in Maharashtra. Again from Maharashtra it may go to West Bengal. So VRL Logistics again on the same truck will pay output tax in Maharashtra and take input tax credit in West Bengal. That truck along with spare parts may go from West Bengal to, say, Karnataka. So VRL Logistics again in West Bengal will pay output tax on the truck and spare parts, and will take input tax credit on in Maharashtra. And again from Karnataka, that truck may come back to Maharashtra, Delhi, so on so forth. So they cannot play this game of input tax credit, paying output tax and taking input tax credit. Moreover, their working capital will be hugely blocked. So these people, I am talking about transportation sector, right? They said that for us it is very difficult to comply. It is actually next to difficult or nearly impossible for us to comply with these provisions. So they had the difficulty. So they had huge difficulty in complying with the provisions, and they had a very logic point. You cannot, my truck will be moving from one place to another. It started from Delhi, again it may come back to Delhi. It started from Delhi, again it may come back to Delhi, right? You cannot ask me to pay output tax in Delhi, then take input tax in Maharashtra, output tax in Maharashtra, then take input tax credit in West Bengal, output tax in West Bengal, take input tax credit in Karnataka, then pay output tax in Karnataka, take input tax credit in Maharashtra again, then pay output tax. This game is not suitable for them, my friends. Now they had a very valid point, and understand this valid point was there for both goods transportation sector and the passenger transportation sector. It was there for both. Though we have taken the example of goods transportation, the same difficulty is there even for passenger transportation. Say for example, you are going in a passenger bus, right? You booked your seat in a bus from Delhi to Maharashtra. You booked your seat, and from Delhi to Maharashtra, obviously one passenger transportation company will take you. Now even for that passenger transportation company, you have the same problem. That passenger transportation company, when it is taking you, one of the passenger from, say, Delhi to Maharashtra, it will have a lot of passengers. They are ready to pay GST on passenger transportation service. That is the service. Now they will move their bus from Delhi to Maharashtra. Again, for them also, that bus is nothing but capital goods, and goods includes capital goods. For them also, the same difficulty of deemed supply of goods as per para 2 of schedule 1 will be there. So this difficulty was faced by both goods transportation sector and passenger transportation sector, and they said that please give us a solution. Please give us a solution. For Reliance Limited, there was no problem. It was a very normal scenario. Government decided to bring this para 2 of schedule 1 only to cover cases like Reliance Limited in this example. So it was a very normal scenario. So for Reliance Limited, there were no problems. And moreover, when you talk about Reliance Limited, normally when the goods are going from Delhi to Maharashtra, the goods will be sold in Maharashtra. Normally it doesn't comes back to Delhi, right? And there's a track also from where the goods are going, and to which state the goods are being sold and finally consumed. But it's not true with the truck or buses or aeroplanes or helicopters or any type of conveyance. It is not only about trucks or buses. It can be trucks or buses or helicopter or aeroplane or any other type of conveyance, vessel, vehicles, normal vehicles. It is applicable for any type of conveyance, whether going by land or going by air or going by sea. Now it is applicable for all types of conveyance. So when they spoke to the government, they said that, see, we have a typical issue. Our trucks or buses or any other conveyance will keep moving, and it is not that it is going to be used or consumed, that we are using it for doing our business. It is not for further supply, it is not for further sale. That's the difference. When Reliance Limited has given the goods from Delhi to Maharashtra, it is for further sale in Maharashtra. But it is not the same for VRL Logistics, goods transportation company, or any other passenger transportation company. For them, the trucks and buses are not given for further supply or further sale. They are going to move again and again. They are going to come back again and again. It is for doing their business that the trucks or buses or any other type of conveyance is moving from one state to another state. And government understood their difficulty, and government said that okay, we understand your problem. So what did government said? When you're talking about the first two types of notified activities which are not supply, which can be for any person, it is not only for transportation sector, it can be for any person. Interstate movement of various modes of conveyance, whether it is trucks or trains or tankers or trailers or vessel, any type of conveyance, etc., etc., whether carrying goods or passengers between distinct person as given in section 25 subsection 4 shall not be treated as supply. Shall not be treated as supply. Shall not be treated as supply as per para 2 of schedule 1. Right, that was the first thing, which was again given by virtue of a circular 1/1 2017 CGC, which means it was the first circular in total and first circular of the year 2017 IGST. This circular is very special because it is not actually acting as a circular, it is acting as a notification. Though we are surprised to see this in form of circular, this should not have been in form of circular, this should have been in form of notification. Nevertheless, this 1/1 2017 IGST. Why IGST? It is not central circular, it is integrated circular. It is not a circular under Central GST Act, it is a circular under Integrated GST Act. Why? You are talking about interstate movement. Why? You are talking about interstate movement. Right. Now, when this relaxation was given, obviously the problem was solved for the truck or buses or trains or trailers or vessel, any type of conveyance. But the solution was not only required for the trucks, it was also required for the spare parts, isn't it? So, the second circular, I am repeating, I am surprised to see this in form of circular, it should be by way of notification. Again, circular which is 21/2017 CGST. That circular said that interstate movement of rigs, tools, spares. You are talking about spare parts. Interstate movement of rigs, tools and spares, which and all other goods on wheels, which means that any other goods which is there on that particular truck or trailer, or you are talking about buses, or you are talking about aeroplanes, or you are talking about helicopters, or you are talking about trailers, any other type of conveyance like cranes, between distinct person, which is under section 25, shall also not be treated as supply because of your schedule 1. It is trying to tell in simple language that whether it is interstate movement of the main conveyance, that is truck or buses or trailers or vessels or aircrafts, etc., etc., or spare parts, that is tools, rigs and spares, tools, rigs, spares and goods on wheels like cranes, all these items which are there along with that conveyance, they will not be treated as supply because of para 2 of schedule number 1. So that was the relaxation given by the government. How government gave relaxation? By notifying it under not supply. By notifying it under not supply. And I said that it is for any person. So it is not only for passenger transportation, goods transportation sector or passenger transportation sector per se. It is not even for a normal company. Now, if I were to write the same example in simple another language, which will make sure that you have 360 degrees approach. Right, scenario 2. The same example. Right, now you are talking about, say, Reliance Limited. Again the same example, Delhi, carrying the goods to Reliance Limited, Maharashtra. Right, but now in this case Reliance Limited is taking the goods in its own conveyance. This truck belongs to Reliance Limited. This truck also belongs to Reliance Limited, which means that Reliance Limited is taking the goods in its own conveyance. There's no transportation company, it is in its own conveyance, right? Again the same problem comes up. You are talking about what? You are talking about goods. Then you are talking about what? You are talking about the truck. Then you are talking about what? You are talking about the spare parts, that is tools, rigs, spares and any other goods on wheels including crane. So you are talking about the spare parts on the truck. So when you talk about all these items, right, again the same issue comes up. Now when you talk about Reliance Limited of Delhi giving the goods, that goods may be say iron and steel, or that goods may be say FMCG goods, any goods, normal goods which is for further sale. Now when Reliance Limited is transporting the goods from Delhi to Maharashtra for further supply, now this clearly is deemed supply of goods as per what? Para 2 of schedule 1. Right, and obviously whenever it is supplied, the documentation will be tax invoice. Right, here you have no issues, no problem. And Reliance Limited, Delhi will pay output tax, and Reliance Limited, Maharashtra will take input tax credit. Again the problem lies only on the right hand side, that is when you are talking about trucks and spare parts. Here if this is called, this is also categorized as deemed supply of goods, because Reliance Limited even owns that truck and spare parts. So here again it is talking about deemed supply of goods, but now you are talking about trucks and spare parts. Now you are talking about truck and spare parts, again by virtue of what? Again by virtue of para 2 of schedule 1. But here again the same difficulty will come up, and the difficulty that we are discussing earlier. And by the way, this deemed supply of goods here, it is for Reliance Limited, and deemed supply of goods being trucks and spare parts is again for Reliance Limited, because there is no transportation company involved. Right, here Reliance Limited is having no problem, no issues. Why? The goods are for further supply. The goods which are inside the truck are for further supply. Reliance Limited Delhi will pay output tax on them, and Reliance Limited Maharashtra will take input tax credit on them. And when they are sold from Maharashtra, that input tax credit would be used for paying that output tax. So here there are no issues. They have problem here. The problem lies here. What is the problem which is there? The problem or the difficulty lies here. What is the problem or the difficulty that lies here? Again, now it is for the same company, Reliance Limited. What is the problem? Now, Reliance Limited, for one part, it is having no problem. For the goods inside the truck, it is having absolutely no problem. It is ready to pay output tax in Delhi and take input tax credit in Maharashtra. Reliance Limited now is having problem, just like VRL was having in the previous scenario. It is having problem with respect to that truck and spare parts. Why? That truck and spare parts, even when it is the truck belonging to Reliance Limited, it will keep moving. It is not for further sale or further supply. It will go from Delhi to Maharashtra. From Maharashtra, it may go to West Bengal. From West Bengal, it may come to Karnataka. From Karnataka to Maharashtra. From Maharashtra to Delhi, etc., etc. So that truck or spare parts is not for further supply in Maharashtra. It will go there, deliver the goods there. It may come back or go to another destination. So here this problem lies, and the same notification is the solution. So 1/1 2017 and 12/12 2017 will give relaxation, and whether it is for VRL Logistics or whether it is for Reliance Limited's own truck. So whether it is a truck, the truck belongs to VRL Logistics, or whether the truck belongs to Reliance Limited itself, there will be absolutely no problem. This deemed supply which was there by virtue of para 2 of schedule 1, now because of not supply, there won't be GST. Whether the truck belongs to Reliance, truck and the spare parts belongs to Reliance Limited itself, or whether the goods of Reliance Limited are taken in truck belonging to VRL Logistics, that truck portion and spare part portion would not be subject to GST. It would not be taken as deemed supply as per para 2 of schedule 1. Rather, it is a relaxation from that. It is a relaxation from what? It is a relaxation from that para 2 of schedule 1. And they cautiously add that IGST would be there if that particular transportation, if that truck or vessel or any type of conveyance is for further supply. So in both the cases, IGST shall be there where that movement is for further supply, which means that if that conveyance is to be sold further in Maharashtra, supposing you are talking about VR Logistics taking the goods, taking its truck from Delhi to Maharashtra for further supply, which means that in that scenario there will be GST if it is for further supply. Okay, let us talk about the manufacturer of the truck. Right, think of manufacturer of the truck. So manufacturer of truck, we are not talking about Reliance Limited, we are not talking about VRL Logistics, we are talking about manufacturer. We are talking about manufacturer of the truck. That manufacturer of the truck may take its trucks from Delhi to Maharashtra. Then it is deemed supply because that is not for the purpose of transportation. That is for further supply. That is for further supply. And whenever there are any repairs or maintenance done on those trucks or vessels or any other type of conveyance, that will be obviously the respective tax, whether it is CGST, SGST or IGST. So they are trying to tell that we are giving relaxation only for those types of conveyance who are actually doing the job of transporting and coming back, transporting and coming back, transporting and coming back. But if you are talking about a truck manufacturer himself, he will be willing to further supply or further sell the truck. So when the truck manufacturer, don't remember Reliance Limited, don't remember VRL, just forget about Reliance Limited and VRL. If you are talking about a truck manufacturer himself, right, say for example you are talking about Tata company manufacturing mini trucks, right, when you talk about Tata company manufacturing mini trucks, it would like to take few trucks from Delhi to Maharashtra for further selling in Maharashtra. In that scenario, on those trucks, it would be deemed supply as per schedule 1 para 2 and there will be IGST. This relaxation will not help. This relaxation will help only for the trucks or the trailers or the rails or the aircrafts which are actually used for transportation during the journey. Now, when Tata company is giving the trucks, mini trucks from say, you are talking about Delhi to Maharashtra, it is for further supply in Maharashtra. It is not for transporting the goods on it, it is for further sale. They want to sell those trucks in Maharashtra. Then this relaxation will not help. So very clearly mentioned that in that scenario, Tata Limited Delhi will have to pay IGST when you talk about giving the trucks to Tata Limited Maharashtra. Why? Why? Because it is for further supply of trucks. Now those trucks will not have any goods. There will be new trucks without any goods without any goods inside. They will be new trucks, rather those mini trucks would be on a bigger transportation conveyance, right? So those are the new trucks on which GST would be paid by Tata Limited Delhi when those new trucks are given to Tata Limited Maharashtra. Why? They are not being used as of now for transportation because they are now being given to Maharashtra for further supply or further sale in Maharashtra. And the second point is quite clear. If at all there is any repairs and maintenance during the course of movement, normal GST would be CGST, SGST or IGST as the case may be would be there on repairs and maintenance. Right. That is the first part of notified cases. Out of 5 notified cases, we have seen 2 notified cases. My friends, we left out an example which was there discussed in what? Discussed in the category of deemed supply, and I clearly wrote that we are going to discuss this example once we see not supply, and that portion was this particular example. Now let us analyze this. Supply of goods or services between distinct persons without consideration in transport as conveyance. Rather the same example is given here. Reliance Limited Delhi is giving the goods to Reliance Limited Maharashtra in VRL Logistics. Right. Movement of goods of Reliance Limited from Delhi to Mumbai, they are distinct person. Is it deemed supply by virtue of para 2? Yes, it is deemed supply by virtue of para 2. Movement of truck. Now let us talk about truck. Movement of truck by VRL Logistics from VRL Logistics Delhi to VRL Logistics Mumbai. They are also distinct persons. So VRL Logistics is there in Mumbai as well as there in Delhi. So they are also distinct person. But strictly speaking, it was also covered by para 2 of schedule 1. But because of not supply, notified cases, now it won't be taken as supply. That is circular number 1/1/2017 will rescue it from schedule 1. circular number 1/1 2017 will help out or will rescue this particular VR logistics from schedule 1. And you are talking about movement of spares, that is you are talking about tools, rigs, spares or any other goods on wheels, example cranes, spares of trucks of VR logistics from VR logistics Delhi to VR logistics Mumbai. Again, VR logistics Delhi and VR logistics Mumbai are distinct persons. So strictly speaking, it was also covered by deemed supply, that is para 2 of schedule 1. Now, because of circular number 12/12/2017, this also will not be treated as supply. So VR logistics is not required to pay GST on the truck being moved from Delhi to Maharashtra, on the spare parts which are there on the truck being moved from Delhi to Maharashtra. VR logistics will pay GST on its transportation charges, but not on the truck and the spare parts. Example 12. Rather, example 12 talks in the same way. The only difference is Reliance Limited Delhi is now transporting the goods to Reliance Limited Mumbai in its own truck. That was also clearly discussed in that pictorial presentation. Own truck. The difference is now it is not taking the help of third party VR logistics, it is transporting the goods in its own truck. Now in all the places it is all about Reliance Limited. Every place, whether you are talking about the goods, whether you are talking about the truck or whether you are talking about spare parts, it is all belonging to Reliance Limited. For the movement of goods of Reliance Limited from Delhi to Maharashtra, it is deemed supply as per para 2 of schedule 1. As per para 2 of schedule 1. And for the movement of truck and spare part also, basically that was also covered by para 2 of schedule 1. But wait, circular number 1/1/2017 and circular number 12/12/2017 said that whether the truck belongs to a transportation company or whether the truck belongs to company itself, it doesn't differentiate it. They are not going to differentiate that you should be a transporter. You mean Reliance Limited is not a transporter, but it is taking its goods in its own conveyance. Even in that scenario, that circular number 1/1/2017 and 12/12/2017 tells that you need not pay GST on the truck and the spare parts, that is tools, rigs, spares or any other goods on wheels inside the truck, because that truck and the spare parts along with it will keep on moving and may come back to the same origin, right? So understanding that logic, they said that okay, we are giving you relaxation from deemed supply. I'll repeat, the first two notified cases of not supply are nothing but escape mechanism from para 2 of schedule 1. That is an escape route from para 2 of schedule 1. That is there only if the trucks and spare parts on the trucks, and when I'm talking about trucks, don't take it literally, it is about all types of conveyance. It is for buses, it is for trains, it is for trailers, it is for aeroplanes, it is for any other type of aircraft, it is for railways, etc, etc, right? Any type of conveyance and the tools, rigs, spares and any goods on wheels on the conveyance, it is that relaxation is for all these conveyance. But when that item itself, when the truck itself is for further supply, then that circular number 1/1/2017 and 12/12/2017 will not help. What is meant by when that conveyance itself is for further supply? We rather took an example and I clearly explained that if at all Tata Limited is sending the goods to Tata Limited Delhi is sending the goods to Tata Limited Maharashtra. Say for example, it is taking it in a train or a crane, right? When you talk about in that scenario, number of trucks are there. So you have number of trucks, mini trucks. The goods itself are mini trucks. Now, whether Tata Limited should pay GST on this mini trucks? Yes, it is deemed supply of goods as per para 2 of schedule 1 and GST will be there. There would not be any relaxation. Circular number 1/1/2017 and 12/12/2017 will not come because all the trucks, say all the trucks which are moving, say in the goods transportation rail, right? All these trucks are for further supply. They are there for further supply in Maharashtra. By the way, all these trucks are new trucks which will not be having any goods inside the truck. They are for further supply in Maharashtra. They are not going to come back. They are for further supply in Maharashtra. You are talking about a truck manufacturing company, or a truck dealer, which means that you are talking about a manufacturer of truck or a dealer of truck. For them, this relaxation won't help. Simple logic. In that scenario, that particular mini trucks which are going to Maharashtra, they will be sold in Maharashtra. They are given to Maharashtra for further sale in Maharashtra. Right? Point number 1, they don't carry any goods. Point number 2, they are given for further supply. Point number 3, they don't come back normally. Right? They won't come back to Delhi. But when those mini trucks are sold and used by other companies for transportation between two states, then in that scenario, whatever circulars we have discussed, 1/1/2017 and 12/12/2017 will come to the rescue. Right? That is this understanding. So this example which was left out, example 11 and 12, we have discussed. Rather, the same thing was discussed in pictorial presentation as well. Now, we are discussing what? We are discussing not supply, part 1. Not supply, part 1 is to be divided into two activities or transactions undertaken by any person, 3 activities or transactions undertaken only by government. Rather, when we have discussed the definition of business, we touched upon these 3 notified activities of the government. Right? I'll remind you, as per section 2 of CGST Act, which defines business, it is very clearly mentioned that the last part of business, out of 9 points, that A, B, C, D, etc., the last point, I said that even government doing any work, including when it is acting as public authority, it would be called as business. So we are talking about government. Now, normally, even when government is supplying goods or services, it is subject matter of GST. We have discussed the logic, etc. There are 2 logic behind it. First, government is not paying taxes to itself. Government collects the taxes from the recipient and then pays to the respective pocket of central government, state government or union territory, as the case may be. Second, it would not be fair if government is not asked to pay GST. Why? Private entities will then have a problem. So if I am a private entity supplying a goods or services along with GST, and if government is giving the same goods or services without GST, then people may purchase from the government entity. So that is another issue. So government are also liable to pay GST, unlike your income tax. Government are also liable to pay GST, unlike your income tax. But wait, there are 3 exceptions when government is not required, or there is no levy on the transactions undertaken by the government. What are those transactions? Any activity by the government in relation to a function entrusted to a panchayat under Article 243G. Government doing panchayat related activities under Article 243G of the Constitution, that is not subject to GST. That is not subject to GST. Or services by way of any activity in relation to a function entrusted to a municipality under Article 243W, which means that municipality related activities under Article 243W is again not subject to GST if it is taken by the government. I have given few examples. What are the municipality related activities? Change of land use, maybe from residential to commercial or vice versa, commercial building approval, utility services like your electricity, etc., etc. So, we are talking about municipality related functions. To put it in simple terms, panchayat related functions of government under Article 243G and municipality related functions which are undertaken by a government under Article 243W, right? These are not subject matter of GST. When you talk about panchayat and municipality, understand that you are talking about the third tier structure of the government, that is local authority. Government is always divided in 3 parts: central government, state government and local authority. So you are talking about that local authority when they are doing panchayat related functions mentioned under Article 243G, or when they are doing municipality related functions mentioned under Article 243W. There is a new addition which was added later on: service by way of grant of alcoholic liquor license. Service by way of grant of alcoholic liquor license, where they take license fees or application fees by whatever name it is called, right? So if I were to make it very clear, the first 2 functions are actually undertaken by local authority, and when you talk about service by way of grant of alcoholic liquor license, where you take something called as license fees or application fees, it is done by generally state government. And mind you, in all the cases the focus is only on service. They don't focus on supply of goods, they focus only on supply of service. So these three activities of government, to be very specific, two activities of local authority and one activity of state government, they are not subject or they are not liable to GST. Any other activity apart from these three activities of the government is liable to GST. Now wait for the time being. They gave a circular the moment they added the third point to the government, and that circular is quite simple. I said you, the moment it is all about circular, keep calm. You will find the circular is quite simple, and this circular was again very simple. Circular number 121/40/2019 CGST, which means that 121 circular in total, 40th circular of 2019. That said that this particular non-leviable transactions or non-leviable activities is only for supply of service by way of grant of alcoholic liquor license by the state government, that we have already discussed, which is as an agreement between the central government and state government. So that is as per the agreement between central government and the state government. And this point, which means that the third point where they talk about license fees and application fees for grant of alcoholic liquor license by the state government, will not apply to grant of any other licenses, which means that they are very clear. They are talking about grant only of a liquor license. It is not applicable to grant of other licenses, which means if you are talking about state government getting license fees, right, for grant of alcoholic liquor license, then that is not subject to GST. And if it is getting license fees for grant of any other license for whatever purposes, any other license, that is very much subject to GST. They are very clear that only when you are talking about grant of alcoholic liquor license, right, only then alcoholic liquor license, only then there is no levy of GST. And if the state government is getting license fees or application fees by whatever name you call for grant of any other license, this AOL stands for grant of any other license, then that is clearly subject matter of GST. So this circular tells in a very simple way that please take care that this non-leviability for the government, for the state government in specific, is only when it is getting license fees or application fees for grant of alcoholic liquor license. That is only applicable for grant of alcoholic liquor license. And if the state government is giving any other license, and it is taking some license fees or application fees, on that GST is very much applicable. They are very clear with that aspect. Now if I were to talk about government in a simple way, if I were to summarize this government in a very simple way, notified cases of government, which are three. Now you have to understand that you are talking about government, which means that central government, state government and local authority. Now notified cases of government, what are the three notified cases of government? You are talking about three notified cases and other cases. You are talking about your three notified cases and other cases. When you talk about these three notified cases, there is no levy of GST. And any other case of government where it is giving goods or services, there is levy of GST. We are concerned only with levy, right? We are not talking about collection. There are lot of government activities which are covered by exemption notification, but our discussion is only restricted to levy, right? So there is no levy on three notified cases. And what are those three notified cases? To be very specific, those three notified cases are Panchayat related functions under Article 243G, municipality related functions under Article 243W, right? And both these categories or both these cases, services are actually given by local authorities. And when you talk about grant of alcoholic liquor license, where they take license fees or application fees by whatever name you call, and this is actually undertaken by state government. So only in these three cases, and by the way, all these three cases happens to be supply of services. So these three supply of services by the government are not leviable to GST. Levy itself is not there. In this case, levy itself is not there, no levy. Forget about collection. So if there is no levy, obviously there is no collection. Now when you talk about levy, there may be collection, right, or it may be possible that there may not be collection, no collection. There may be collection or there may not be any collection. Why there may not be any collection? Because of exemption notification. There may be few entries in the exemption notification which would tell that no, we don't have GST there on it because it is exempted for the time being. So we are talking about exemption notification. Remember my friends, exemption notification always means that there is levy, but for the time being we are giving relaxation. That is the nature of exemption notification. So exemption notification, if an item is mentioned in exemption notification, it always indirectly means, or the interpretation could be taken in such a way that levy was always there, but as of now they don't want to collect tax, therefore they have kept under exemption. So when you talk about these three cases of government, there is no levy, no collection. Other cases of government, levy is there, right, collection or maybe there, may not be there, that we have to see exemption notification and decide, right. So that is a summary of transactions or activities undertaken by the government. Now if you look at these 5 notified cases, you will have more clarity. So what we have completed, my friends, we have completed not supply part 1. Not supply part 1 talks about 5 notified cases. 2 notified cases which are 2 notified activities or transactions which can be undertaken by any person, and 3 notified activities or transactions which are undertaken only by government. In these 5 cases there won't be any supply. Levy itself will not be there. Forget about collection. And we have seen clearly with the help of examples, right. Now if you see the examples, although the first part would be talking about the same thing, rather once we complete all these points, we'll see the examples so that things would be more clear. Now we'll take point by point and we'll see each point's example. Now we are entering what? We are entering not supply part 2, that is schedule 3. Now we have entered not supply part 2. Not supply part 1 was notified cases that we have seen. Now we have entered not supply part 2. Not supply part 2. Now before we enter not supply part 2, let us complete the examples of not supply part 1 so that it will be quite simple for you guys to understand. Not supply part 1, a quick revision of what we are discussing. Not supply part 1. What was that in not supply part 1? 5 notified cases, 2 notified cases of any person and 3 notified cases of what? Government. Movement of goods between distinct person. Movement of any conveyance, etc. Example truck, any conveyance carrying goods. Movement of any conveyance carrying goods or passengers between distinct person. What will happen? There is no levy. Movement of rigs, tools, spares or any goods on wheels like cranes between distinct person. What was the understanding? There is no levy. Though it was initially covered by para 2 of schedule 1, finally the understanding was, if at all you are talking about trucks, buses, trains, aeroplanes, etc., any type of conveyance which is used for movement of goods inside it, then there is no GST, because it is an escape mechanism from para 2 of schedule 1. And when you talk about rigs, tools, spares or any other goods on wheels on those conveyance, again that is also not subject to GST. But if you are talking about movement of other goods between distinct person, that is very much subject to GST because of para 2 of schedule 1. That is a summary of what we have discussed. And when you talk about government providing services of panchayat related activities under article 243G, no supply. Government providing services of municipality under article 243W, again it is not supply. And if you are talking about service by way of grant of alcoholic liquor license, where the consideration is in form of license fees or application fees or any other name, no supply. The first 2 cases rather are undertaken by local authority, and the third case is undertaken by state government. Any other service of the government, as we have discussed in the pictorial presentation also, that is levy. That is levy. Friends, this first 2 examples were that of what? The first 2 examples are that of not supply part 1. Not supply part 1. And write starting from example 3 till example 12. Till example 12. You are talking about not supply part 2. What is not supply part 2? Not supply part 2 talks about schedule 3. Not supply part 2 talks about schedule 3. So let us try to see, let us try to understand what is given in this particular schedule 3. Schedule 3 has got how many cases? 8 cases. Not supply part 2 is nothing but your schedule 3. Not supply part 2 is nothing but your schedule 3, which has got 8 notified cases. 8 transactions or activities are mentioned in schedule 3. So let us see all these cases one by one and let us try to analyze all these cases so that things will be very clear. Right, at least first let us see the heading, then we'll see point by point and related examples. We'll always do that. So whenever things are more, we'll see a point and the example. We'll see a point and then the example. You have to just follow the flow that we are discussing. Alright, I'll tell you, I'll repeat at the cost of repetition that we are going to change the flow in between, but just be with me, just follow the flow. You'll find things very simple. Whenever we are changing the flow, it is for a particular purposes. I do understand how our brain functions, right? So when I see that okay, this concept may not be discussed now because it may not be reachable to you, I'll make sure that that is not discussed and it is discussed at the right point of time. And at times I may take the entire concepts, all the points, then the examples, or at times I may take point by point and the examples. That is to only ensure that you understand it very clearly. If the concept is small, if the number of points are small, I'll complete all these things, then the examples. If the concepts are quite lengthy, then I will complete one point and related examples so that you find it very simple. Now coming back to not supply part 2, which talks about schedule 3, there are 8 cases. Right, the first point you're talking about employer-employee. Employer-employee. So when you talk about employer-employee relationship, right, what are they trying to tell? First let us see the headings and we'll see point by point. First is employer-employee, then it is MP-MLAs, then it is court and tribunal, then the fourth point is deceased, and the next point is land and building, and the next point is actionable claim. Then you talk about drop shipment or merchant trading. The right name is drop shipment, but your ICA material uses the term merchant trading. And the 8th point, it talks about supply of warehouse goods or high sea sales. So 8th point has got 2 categories, either supply of warehouse goods or your high sea sales. Your high sea sales. So there are totally 8 points that we have to focus on. Point number 1 talks about your employer-employee relationship. Point number 2 talks about your MP, MLAs, etc. Point number 3 talks about your court and tribunal, only court and tribunal. Point number 4, deceased. Point number 5 talks about your land and building. And point number 6 talks about actionable claim. Point number 7 talks about your drop shipment and or otherwise called as merchant trading. And point number 8 talks about 2 categories. One is sale of warehouse goods and other is high sea sales. So let us see each point and analyze it. So there are totally 8 categories. First is employer-employee. Service by an employee. Service by an employee to the employer in course of or in relation to employment. They are very clear. Who should be the supplier? Employee. Service by employee. Service by employee. Right, it is service by employee. To whom? To employer. When? In course or in relation to employment. Right, so you'll find a point there, refer note 1. So you have to see note 1 to understand what exactly they are trying to tell. Simple language. They are trying to tell that if you're talking about wages of laborers, or if you're talking about salary of normal employees, or if you're talking about remuneration, or if you're talking about remuneration given to privileged employees, right, they are not subject matter of GST. So when employee is working for the employer, what he gets either wages or salary or remuneration. That is not subject to GST. That is not subject to GST. They don't want to have GST on wages, salary or remuneration. Friends, understand that when you are going to qualify as a chartered accountant, and suppose that you are working in a very big company, right, you will be getting a huge package. Now that salary is nothing but the service which is done by you In return, the company is giving you salary. So clearly, actually, if at all this point was not that, it was a supply of service. By whom? By you, employee. To whom? To company, employer. Right? Just because this point is that there's no GST on this wages, salary or remuneration. So that is the intention of this particular point. Now let us try to understand with the help of this pictorial presentation which is given in form of chart. Now what are they trying to talk about? They are actually talking about employer-employee relationship, my friends. And mind you, in deemed supply also we have discussed something about employer-employee which will also be given here. But then at that point of time when you are talking about employer-employee, we were talking about employer giving gifts to employee, which means that company giving gifts to its workers or its employees. It is now ulta. So that is also covered in the next part. Now first let us talk about the first point, the point number 1, which is talking about employer-employee relationship. So first part they are telling that services by employee to employer in course of employment or in relation to employment. Now to make it quite simple, we have this pictorial presentation or tabular presentation which will make all these points quite simple. See, strictly speaking, if you see any big company, right, any big industry or factory, you will find employees into 3 categories. What are those 3 categories? The first category you will find laborers. The second category you will find normal employees. And the third category you will find so-called privileged employees. We are using some common terms to make things quite simple. Laborers, normal employees and privileged employees. What will laborers get? Laborers will get wages, right? That is not subject to GST. That is not subject to GST. That is covered by para point 1 of schedule 3. Point 1 of schedule 3, that is not subject to GST. And when you talk about wages to laborers, it is including seasonal laborers. Because if I stop here, one may have a doubt. Sir, what if they are seasonal laborers? Answer is same. Even for seasonal laborers, you do have employer-employee relationship. Therefore, answer remains the same, my friends. So when you talk about the first category of employees, you are talking about laborers. Right? Laborers will get wages and that wages is not subject to GST. That laborers, even if they are seasonal laborers, even then the wages is not subject to GST, right, including the bonus portion. Now let us talk about the second category, normal employees. Normal employees will get salary, right? That salary is not subject to GST. And when you talk about wages or salary, they are very clear that wages or salary, whether it is along with bonus or gratuity, bonus is not only for salary, it can be even for wages. When that bonus or gratuity is also not subject to GST. So it is not only wages or salary that is not subject to GST. Along with wages or salary, even bonus and gratuity which is given at the time of leaving the employment, even that is not subject to GST. Now privileged employees. When you talk about privileged employees, basically you are talking about partners and directors. Partners and directors. Right. So when you talk about partners and directors, we are naming them as privileged employees. So remuneration paid to partners. First let us talk about partners. Remuneration to paid to partners is again not subject to GST. This understanding we are taking from service tax. And we are going by the same concept that the same thing prevails in GST also, because the schedule 3, most of the points, to be very specific, first 6 points are actually taken from your service tax only. So this point is taken from your service tax. Remuneration paid to partners is also not subject to GST. So in service tax there was a clarification at one point of time which said that remuneration is always only paid to working partners, my friends. Remuneration is always paid to working partners. That is not subject to GST. Now when you talk about directors, things becomes very, very tricky. When you talk about directors, things become very, very tricky. Rather, there were 2 advanced rulings on directors recently, and mind you, my friends, that advanced rulings are not applicable for your exams. But once you are qualified, you will find those advanced rulings quite strange, quite funny at times. You had 2 separate understanding by 2 separate advanced rulings. What is advanced ruling? We'll understand it later. Right, so as of now we'll understand in a very simple terms which is applicable for your exams. Friends, I'll repeat this particular point that whatever we are discussing is more than what is required for your exam. Actually more than what is required. Now, I'm not taking too much more, but I'm making sure that we see this 360 degree approach which is not discussed anywhere else. We are seeing this 360 degrees approach. But at the same point, my friends, you have to understand that this is only the foundation. Moment you are done with your CA, you have to build your understanding based on what you have understood, and there are a lot other things which are there in practice, or when you want to learn something, when you want to do more and more R&D, you will find that there is so much more to be discussed. But that foundation, I'll make sure that it is so strong that it will never fall. Even after 20 years of your life, that foundation will never fall. So that is my promise to you, friends. Now when you talk about directors, you have to categorize it. If at all you are talking about managing director and whole-time director, if at all you are talking about managing director and whole-time director, they actually work like employees. They give their full time, though they are technically not employees, but they actually work like employees. They work full time. Therefore, even that is not subject to GST. So when you talk about the first category of employees, laborers. When you talk about laborers, what is happening? Wages paid to them, bonus paid to them, gratuity paid to them, no GST. When you talk about normal employees, salary to them, bonus to them, gratuity to them, there's no GST. And laborers, including seasonal laborers, is also covered. When you talk about privileged employees, divided into two: partners and directors. Remuneration to partners, there's no GST. Remuneration to directors, wait, ask yourself a question: which director are you talking about? If you are talking about managing director or whole-time director, there is no GST. If you are talking about other types of directors, let it be nominee directors or independent directors or non-executive directors, other than managing director and whole-time director, then the answer will change. We are not seeing the answer now, but then the answer will change. I believe my friends still here, the understanding is clear, because we are not seeing the last two cases now. We'll see the second point and come back here. Right. Now what was the second point? MP, MLAs, etc. So we are talking about what? Functions performed by members of parliament or members of state legislative assembly or members of panchayat or members of municipalities or members of any other local authorities. So you are talking about MPs, MLAs. Functions which are performed by members of parliament, MP, or member of state legislative assembly or member of panchayat or member of municipalities or any other local authority, when they get any amount, that is not subject to GST. So if you are talking about an MP or MLA getting an amount from the government, that is not subject to GST. In the second point, MP, MLAs, there are actually three subcategories: A, B and C. The first point is MP, MLAs. The second point is duties performed by a person who holds any post in terms of provisions of constitution, which means that if at all you are talking about any person who is holding a constitutional post and in return is getting some payment from the government, that is not subject to GST. For at all you are talking about any person who is not MP, MLA, he is not MP, MLA, but he is having a constitutional post, he is holding a constitutional post and is getting some amount from the government for that, that is not subject to GST. For example, you are talking about President of India, Chief Justice of India, or Chief Justice of even of High Court, or Comptroller or Auditor General of India, or RBI Governor, etc. Any person who is holding constitutional post, if he is getting some amount because of that constitutional post from the government, that amount is not subject to GST. That is point number B. And point number C, duties performed by any person as chairperson, member or directors. Duties performed by any person as chairperson, member or director, which is in a body which is established by central government, state government or local authority, that is covered. Duties performed by any person who is holding the post of chairperson or member or director, who is actually chairperson, member or director of what? Of a body which is established by central government, state government or local authority. So supposing if I am appointed as a chairman, or I am appointed as a member or appointed as a director in any body which is actually established by government, central, state or local authority, then the amount that I am going to get because of my appointment as chairperson, member or director, even that is not subject to GST. You will find one thing common in all these 3 points, A, B, C. The payment is actually made by the government to them. What was point number A? Functions which are performed by whom? Members of parliament or members of state legislature or members of panchayat or members of municipalities or members of any other local authorities. Right? They are going to get the amount from whom? Government. That is not subject to GST. Point number 2. functions performed by any person who is holding a constitutional post, right? President, Chief Justice of India, etc., etc. They are going to get the payment from whom? Government. Even that is not subject to GST. Or duties performed by a person holding the post of either chairperson or member or director, either chairperson or a normal member or a director, where in a body established by whom? Government, the central government, state government or local authority. Again, where the payment will be made by the government, it is not subject to GST. Right, so point number 2 talks about this. Point number 2 is not only talking about MP MLAs. If I want to bifurcate point number 2, A is MP MLAs, B is constitutional post, C is chairperson, member or director in a body established by government. Government always has got 3 parts: central government, state government and local authority. Now, why I discuss this in between? Now, let us come back to employer-employee relationship, point number 1, and let us merge both, try to understand. Now, employer-employee relationship, employee can be categorized into 3. First, you are talking about normal employee. Second, you are talking about laborers. Second, you are talking about normal employees, and third, you are talking about privileged employees. Now, when you talk about laborers, including seasonal laborers, when they are getting their wages or bonus or gratuity, no GST. Normal employees, when they are getting their salary, bonus or gratuity, no GST. Privileged employees, categorized into 2. If you are talking about remuneration paid to partners, no GST. If you are talking about remuneration paid to directors, if the directors happens to be managing director or whole-time director, no GST. But if the director happens to be any other director other than managing director, whole-time director, such as independent director or a nominee director or a non-executive director, then ask yourself a question. Are you talking about the director of body established by central government, state government or local authority? If yes, then even that is not subject to GST. All these initial cases were not subject to GST because of point number 1 of schedule 3, and this case is not subject to GST because of point number 2 of schedule 3. What was point number 2? Point number 2 was talking about MP MLAs, it was talking about constitutional posts, and it was talking about chairperson, member or director. Chairperson, member or director, any director. Director of what? Of a body established by central government, state government or local authority. And if you are talking about director being other than managing director, whole-time director, but you are not talking about a body established by central government, state government, local authority. Supposing you are talking about independent director of Reliance Limited. Supposing you are talking about independent director of Reliance Limited. Now, when you talk about independent director of Reliance Limited, is it taxable? Yes, it is now taxable, and it is taxable under RCM. We are seeing the second case of RCM. Now it is taxable under RCM, right? So when you talk about privileged employees, categorize them into 2. Partners getting remuneration, no GST. Directors, wait, ask yourself a question. Are you talking about managing director or whole-time director? Yes, no GST. Then ask another question. Are you talking about other than managing director, whole-time director? If you are talking about directors other than managing director, whole-time director, then ask another question. If are we talking about directors of body established by central government, state government, local authority? If yes, again no GST. If you are talking about, say for example, independent director of a body established by central government, state government or local authority, no GST. If we are talking about, say, independent director of any other company, which means that you are talking about, say, Reliance Limited or Tata company or any other company, in that scenario it is taxable, and it will be taxable under RCM. When I tell it is taxable under RCM, what I am trying to tell? You are talking about independent director giving the services to Reliance Limited. Who is the supplier? Independent director. Who is the recipient? Reliance Limited. Now, when I tell it is under RCM, who will pay GST? Reliance Limited will pay GST under RCM. RCM means recipient will pay GST. Recipient will pay GST. What is meant by forward charge mechanism, my friends? Forward charge mechanism means if I am the supplier and you guys are the recipient, I will be collecting my price, say 10,000 plus GST from you, and GST I will be paying to the government. Right? If I am collecting 10,000 plus say GST 18%, 1,800 from you, I will pay 8,800 to the government. That is forward charge mechanism. What is reverse charge mechanism? If at all our case is covered by reverse charge mechanism, I will collect only 10,000 from you, and you will be required to pay 1800 rupees directly to the government as recipient. So in this case, when you're talking about directors other than managing director and whole-time director, and that is not a case of body established by central government, state government or local authority, then it is taxable, and that too it is taxable under RCM. RCM means recipient will pay. Who is the recipient in this category? The body corporate or the company is the recipient in this category. So that is all about point number 1 and point number 2, employer-employee relationship and MP, MLAs, etc. But wait, before we go ahead, we'll try to complete the other aspects of employer-employee. See friends, when we have seen the earlier chart, it was supply of services by employee to employer in course or in relation to employment, right? So how to understand this in course or in relation to employment? How to understand that in course or in relation to employment? Don't worry, the previous chart we'll discuss after discussing this example. Let us take this example. Little superstar, little STR employee gets the following payments from Superstar Limited employer. So there is an employee by name Little Superstar who is getting the following payment from his employer Superstar Limited. He is getting a salary of 1 lakh per month. Is that salary of 1 lakh per month subject to GST, my friends? No. Why? It is in course of employment. It is in course of employment. Right. He is also getting a bonus of 1,50,000 during Diwali. Is that bonus subject to GST? Again, the answer is no, my friends. Why? Again, this is in course of employment. When he is working, the salary and bonus is a normal thing in course of employment. During the course of employment, he is getting that salary and bonus. Now, my friends, the employer, Superstar Limited, is asking the employee to do an extra work, extra assignment. Now, employee, whenever you talk about extra work or extra assignment, you have the right to tell no, I'm not going to do. But this employee is telling that you have to do an extra work, extra assignment, for which I am going to pay extra 2 lakhs, which is not within the terms of employment. Which means that this employee, Little Superstar, could have said easily no, I'm not going to do this work. I'm not going to do this work because that is not my role, right? If at all you're talking about you being employed in a company, and if your boss tells that you have to do my household work also, are you required to do in your normal course of employment? No. You can tell no, I don't want it, because you are having your right to tell no. There may be other implications, but nevertheless, the basic point is you are having the rights to tell no because it is not in terms of employment. But that employer is telling that, see, I'm going to pay you extra 2 lakhs for this extra work, right? Now, is that GST on the same? The answer is yes. Though you are talking about the same person being employee and same person being employer, now that employer-employee relationship is missing. It is not in course of employment. It is not in relation to employment, which means that it has got nothing to do with employment. When that person, Little Superstar, is doing that extra assignment, he is not acting as employee. That employer-employee relationship is missing when he is doing that extra work. Why? I clearly explained to you, my friends, that he had the right to tell no. So when your boss is telling that you please do my household work also, you had all the rights to tell no. But when your boss is telling that you have to do this extra household work for which I am going to pay you something extra, and if you are ready or if you are in need of that money and if you do that work, you are not working in capacity of employee. There is no employer-employee relationship. Therefore, that is levy. GST is there. GST should be paid. Levy is there. Now, let us continue. This Little Superstar has worked for Superstar Limited, say, for 15 years. Now, he is leaving the employment. And he gets a gratuity at the time of leaving the employment. He gets 15 lakhs. Whether this gratuity is subject to GST, my friends? Friends, we have already discussed that gratuity also is not subject to GST. Why? See, it is not in course of employment. You are not getting gratuity in course of employment while you are doing the work. It is in relation to employment. The wordings are very important. Now it is not in course of employment, but it is in relation to, because Little Superstar has worked for 15 years. At the time of leaving, he is getting the gratuity. So it is in relation to employment. Even that is not subject to GST. Now let us take the last point of this example. When he is leaving the work, the employer, Superstar Limited, is giving him extra amount, non-compete fees at the time of leaving the employment, 50 lakhs. See, now at times this employee may have access to all the secrets of the company. Now the employer Superstar Limited tells that, see, now you're leaving the company, but you know all the secrets of the company, who are the suppliers, who are the customers, what is the pricing of purchase, what is the pricing of sales, what is the profit margin, etc., 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 right, including intellectual property rights, etc., etc. Now this employer Superstar Limited tells that you should not work in any competitor company, or you should not open a similar company for the next 5 years, and which is agreed by this particular employee, for which he is getting extra payment of 50 lakhs. Is it subject to GST? My friends, this is nothing but non-compete fees. It is clearly subject to GST. It has got no connection with employment. It is not in course of employment. It is not in relation to employment. It has got nothing to do with employment. Which means even now, little Superstar had all the rights as an employee to tell, no, I don't want this 50 lakhs non-compete fees. I'll be joining competitor company if I get a good opportunity, or I may myself start a similar company with dealing with the same goods or services. So he would have said no to this non-compete fees. That was his right. Correct. So when you talk about this non-compete fees also 50 lakhs, that is also subject to GST, because it has got nothing at all to do with your employment. So that is all about this example. And when you talk about the first 2 points of Schedule 3, we have discussed the first 2 points. What were they? Employer-employee relationship and MP-MLAs, which has got 3 categories. MP-MLAs, constitutional post, chairperson, member or director of any body established by the government. Now, before going to the third point, let us see other aspect of employer-employee, which you have already seen. What if I tell that there are supply of goods or services by employer to employee? Ulta. Now, company is giving something to by the company to the employee. Now, company is giving something to the employee. Now, I will tell that no, normally employee is only giving the services to employer. True. Employee is working for the company, so employee is the supplier and company is the recipient. But wait, just understand that at times the company or the employer also gives certain goods or services to the employee. For example, there is a company which may give you canteen facilities, for which it is going to charge you some small nominal amount, or it may give you transportation facility, right? So these are the examples where employer, that is company, is giving you the goods or services. Ulta. Employer, that is company, is giving you the goods or services. Now when company is giving you the goods or services, we have already discussed that there is one relaxation. Supposing you are talking about gifts given by the company to employees, we have discussed this very clearly, my friends. So let us just quickly revise that. If at all you are talking about gifts given to the employees by the company, gifts on which ITC is availed, gifts on which ITC is not availed. So let us talk about gifts on which ITC is availed. If at all gifts is given, supposing a company purchases few items from Big Bazaar, Reliance is purchasing few items from Big Bazaar and giving as gifts to employee. If ITC is availed when company is giving that gifts to employees, we have discussed this very clearly with spending a lot of time on this. So you have to quickly tell me the answer, right? Reliance Limited has purchased few items from Big Bazaar, which it is going to give as gifts to employees, and it has availed ITC. If at all it has availed ITC, though it is giving as gifts to its employees, it has to pay GST. That will be GST because of what? Because of para 1 of Schedule 1. Permanent transfer or disposal of business assets on which ITC is availed. On which ITC is availed, GST will be that. Now if I tell that Reliance Limited has not taken ITC on those items which are purchased from Big Bazaar, which are to be given as gifts to the employees, if ITC is not availed, then ask yourself a question, whether the value is more than 50,000 per financial year per employee. Value is more than 50,000 per financial year per employee. If that is the answer, then this entire value is subject to GST. Not only that excess value, entire value. Then this entire value. So if the gifts are worth 65,000, entire 65,000 is subject to GST. Entire value is subject to GST. Now this is because of para 2 of Schedule 1, which talks about supply of goods or services between related person. Mind you, my friends, you have already discussed very clearly, related person includes employer, employee, right? And if gifts are given by employer to employee and the value of which is more than 50,000 per financial year per employee, then it is subject to GST. It is covered by deemed supply part 2, that is schedule 1, and in schedule 1 para 2. What is para 2? Supply of goods or services between related person. Related person includes employer, employee. But there is a relaxation given for employer, employee when, if I tell that the gifts that are given by Reliance Limited, which are purchased from Big Bazaar, Reliance Limited has not availed ITC. So you are escaping para 1 of schedule 1. If you have availed ITC, finished. The moment you have availed ITC, whether it is more than 50,000 or less than 50,000, you have to pay GST. Assume that you have not availed ITC. Again, this condition remains the same. ITC is not availed and the value is up to 50,000 per financial year per employee. So para 2 of schedule 1 gives a relaxation. That is only for employer, employee. It tells that if the gifts are given by the employer to employee, which is within the limit of 50,000 per financial year per employee, then it is not subject to GST. Then it is not subject to GST. It rather gives an escape mechanism. I'll repeat, if at all ITC was availed, whether the gifts worth is more than 50,000 or whether the gifts worth was up to 50,000, you have to pay GST. Reliance Limited has to pay GST. Why? Because of para 1 of schedule 1, permanent transfer or disposal of business assets on which ITC is availed. And if at all ITC is not availed, then you categorize that into 2. If the value of the gifts is more than 50,000 per financial year per employee, then again it is covered by deemed supply. You have to pay GST. But now in this case it is para 2. What is para 2? Supply of goods or services between related persons, which includes employer, employee. And if I tell that ITC is not availed and the gifts which are given by the employer to employee are only up to 50,000 per financial year per employee, then there is no GST because there is a relaxation given in para 2 of schedule 1. So that is this entire understanding. This specified cases was only for gifts. What if I tell that companies, we are not talking about gifts, we are talking about any other case. Say for example, you are talking about any other service provided by the company, any other goods or services provided by the company at a concessional rate or free of cost. That is clearly taxable. Why? You are talking about para 2 of schedule 1 where you are talking about supply of goods or services between related person. If at all you are not talking about gifts, and if you are talking about normal goods or services, say for example you are talking about canteen services given by the company to the employees either at a nominal rate or free of cost, or for example you are talking about say transportation services given by the company to the employee at a nominal rate or say free of cost, that is clearly subject to GST. Why? Because of your para 2 of schedule 1, which tells that supply of goods or services between related person and employer-employee happens to be related person. Now you please don't look at the value whether it is less than 50,000 or more than 50,000, because that less than 50,000 and more than 50,000 is only when you talk about gifts. Other than gifts, you don't talk about that. Other than gifts, you don't talk about that 50,000 limit. It is always subject to GST because of para 2 of schedule 1. Though my friends, we are discussing not supply, we are again going back to deemed supply and connecting the points. Now friends, let us go back to not supply, and now if you find we have thoroughly seen point number 1 and point number 2 of not supply part 2, that is schedule 3. What was point number 1? Employer-employee relationship. What was the term there? Supply of service by an employee to the employer in course or in relation to employment, and we have understood that thoroughly. The second category was MP MLAs, where you had 3 points. MP MLA, we are talking about next category where constitutional post is there, person holding constitutional post, and the third point where you are talking about chairperson, member or director of what? Chairperson, member or even director, any director of what? Of a body established by central government, state government or local authority. Now all the other points are quite simple. Point number 3 is talking about court and tribunal. Service by any court or tribunal. Service by any court or tribunal established under any law for the time being in courts. Obviously, court includes district court, high court and supreme court. So when you're talking about service by any court or tribunal, understand that right to justice is right of everyone. Everyone should be given equal opportunity to justice. Right, not theoretically but even practically, everyone should have equal rights to justice. No one should be kept away from the justice. Justice in India takes time, but we have to improve on that. But it should be accessible by everyone. So even now, you are going to see that the court fees or the tribunal fees even today might be only 20 rupees, 50 rupees. You might wonder why that amount is now also 20 rupees, 50 rupees. But because understand that the right of justice is the right of everyone. Right, so right to justice should be the right of everyone, and that being the case, even today, most of the times when you talk about court fees or tribunal fees, all these amounts which are there to be paid for getting justice are very, very nominal. Right, and rightly they have said that is not subject to GST. They don't want GST. First of all, the amount itself is small, and they don't want GST on the same. So what are they trying to tell? Service by any court or tribunal established under any law for the time being in force. And by the way, there is an explanation which tells that court includes either district court or high court or even supreme court. Now there is a special note which is mentioned there. We'll understand with the help of example. Rather, first we'll see example 3 and 4, which will complete this employer-employee. Then we'll come to example 5 and 6, which will talk about where we'll talk about this court and tribunal. Again, back to point number 1 and point number 2 of your schedule 3, employer-employee and MP-MLAs. Quickly, if you're talking about service by employee to employer in courts or in relation to employment, by laborers including seasonal laborers, there is no GST. By normal employees, there is no GST. By partners to partnership firm, there is no GST. By managing director or whole-time director of body corporate, there is no GST. By other directors to body corporate, assuming that you are not talking about other directors to whom? Body established by government. So if you are talking about other directors, that is independent director, nominee director, etc., to body corporate, there is GST and it is under RCM. Right. Service by MP, MLAs, no GST. Person holding constitutional post, no GST. Service by chairperson, member or even director of body established by government, no GST. Service by any other person other than first three categories, that is GST. Right, that was nothing but a quick summary or quick revision of point number 1 and point number 2 of schedule 3, which was talking about your employer, employee and MP-MLAs. What was point number 3 that we started? What was point number 3? As we have interrupted in between, we'll again go back to point number 3 and try to understand. What was point number 3? It was talking about court and tribunal. Right, what is that? Service by any court or tribunal established under law, any law for the time being in force. And as an explanation, it tells that court includes district court, high court and supreme court. So you are talking about court and tribunal. Court and tribunal. Right, now let us see example number 5. Example number 5. So when you are talking about service by court or tribunal, there is no levy. If you are talking about service by court or tribunal, there is no levy. There is no levy. Service by arbitral tribunal. Arbitral tribunal is different from tribunal. Service by arbitral tribunal. Arbitral tribunal are there for the purpose of arbitration, and court and tribunal are there for the purpose of giving judgments. Arbitral tribunal are there for the purpose of arbitration and reconciliation, settlement. Basically, in simple language, you can talk about settlement, right? And the judgment of arbitral tribunal at times may not be made public, right? So you're talking about Arbitration and Reconciliation Act, arbitral tribunal, right? Even I can be appointed as an arbitral tribunal for solving the dispute between two persons. So it is about settlement. And when you talk about court and tribunal, it is all about judgment. It is all about judgment, interpretation. It is all about judgment, that is interpretation. So if it is court and tribunal, there is no levy. If it is arbitral tribunal, there is levy. Obviously, when you go to court or tribunal or including arbitral tribunal, you need advocates. So service by advocates. I need not stop here. The place where you get the justice is court or tribunal or at times arbitral tribunal. but the person who helps you in getting the justice is advocate. Service by advocates, levy is there. I have written a note for your understanding. Service by arbitral tribunal or advocates, levy is there. They may or may not be exempted, which means that there are certain exemptions also. We are talking only about levy in this chapter. So whether levy is there on service by court or tribunal, no levy. The moment you are talking about court tribunal, there is no levy, no collection. When you talk about service by arbitral tribunal, which are not giving judgments, which are actually there for giving arbitration, that is settlement, levy is there. Service by advocates, levy is there. Levy is there. It may or may not be collected. There may be exemptions also. So we are discussing about levy. Whether levy is there? Yes. Whether levy is there? Yes, my friends. Levy is clearly there. So that was all about your point number 3. So point number 3, where you talk about court and tribunal, the notes which are given are clearly discussed here. We have discussed in terms of example. If you are talking about service by court or tribunal, no levy. If you are talking about service by arbitral tribunal or advocates, levy is there. Exemptions are also there. The collection may or may not be there. Collection may or may not be there. Now next point, you are talking about deceased. So when you are talking about deceased, services by way of funeral, burial, crematorium or mortuary, including transportation of deceased. So they are talking about deceased. Whenever they talk about deceased, they tell that no, we don't want to have GST on this particular aspect. So when you talk about deceased, whether you talk about services of funeral or burial or crematorium, or you are talking about mortuary, including transportation of deceased, they have taken care of all religion, secularism, right, including transportation of deceased. Now let us see example for point number 4 of schedule. Point number 4 of schedule 3, right? Now it talks about services to deceased. Services to deceased. Now let us try to understand that. When you talk about funeral, burial, crematorium or mortuary services, there is clearly no GST. And if you are talking about transportation of deceased, again there is clearly no GST. What about transportation of normal patient, isn't it? Supposing one of your friends, close friends, is having some sudden attack, right, and he is being transported in an ambulance. He is a normal patient, he is not dead, he is a normal person and he is going to be alive. After treatment, he is going to be alive. So he is a normal patient. Now whether levy is there? Yes, my friends, levy is there. Only if you are talking about transportation of deceased, there is no levy. Transportation of a patient, there is levy. At times when you see accidents on road, you don't know whether that person is alive or not. Things will be very difficult, isn't it? So if it is deceased, there is no levy. If he is still alive, there is levy. But wait, even when you talk about transportation of patient, you have an exemption. Services of patient, transportation services of patient, whether ambulances belonging to hospital or any other non-profit organization, it is exempted. So transportation service of a patient in an ambulance belonging to any person means that any person may be hospital or a non-profit organization or etc., any person, it is exempted, which means there is levy, but surely there is no collection. Levy is there, no collection. So to that extent you need not worry. So when you are talking about transportation in ambulance of any person, if he is dead, there is no levy. If he is alive, levy is there, but there is no collection. Levy is there, but it is exempted. We are even discussing one of the point of exemption notification. Transportation service of a patient is exempted. Transportation service of a patient or in an ambulance belonging to anyone. That ambulance may belong to hospital or that ambulance may belong to any other person. That ambulance may belong to Apollo Hospital or that ambulance may belong to a non-profit organization. That is irrelevant. If it is an ambulance which is transporting a patient, it is exempted. Levy is there, but no collection. Right? When you talk about arbitral tribunal and advocates, the previous point, what was the point there? Levy is there, there may be collection, there may be no collection, because depending, there are few cases which are exempted and few cases which are not exempted. But in this case, when you are talking about transportation service of a patient, where levy is there and it is always exempted, there is no doubt, it is always exempted. So there is only one category, no collection. Right? Now that completes the fourth point of schedule 3. So now if you look at the 4 points that we have seen quickly, you will find things are quite simple. What was point number 1 of schedule 3? Employer-employee relationship. We have discussed in length. We have rather done post-mortem of it and have seen all the aspects, small aspects of employer-employee relationship. Point number 2, MP MLAs, which had got 3 categories. We have seen that. Point number 3, court tribunal. Point number 4, deceased. Now point number 5, land and building. Land and building. So when you talk about land and building, sale of land is an immovable property, and subject to paragraph 5b of schedule 2, we have yet to see schedule 2, sale of building. Sale of land and sale of building both are immovable property. Both are immovable property. And whenever you are talking about immovable property, they are very clear they don't want GST. They are very clear that they don't want GST. Rather, my friends, when we have discussed product, goods or services, what was goods? Goods was equal to movable property minus money and securities plus actionable claim plus growing crops grass. What was services? Anything other than goods minus money and securities plus service charges in relation to usage of money plus service charges in relation to usage of securities. I said anything. Service means anything other than goods. It is thing. That thing will not include immovable property. And to clarify it further, they have said that immovable property is not subject matter of GST because stamp duty will be there on it. Immovable property is not subject matter of GST. How they have said? They have put that point under schedule 3, point number 5, where they are talking about land and building. Sale of land and sale of building, immovable property is not subject to GST. So when you are talking about sale of building, you have to be a bit cautious. Sale of land, clearly no GST. Building, you have to be a bit cautious because you have to even understand paragraph 5b of schedule 2. Now, how to understand this in a very, very clear manner? If you are talking about sale of building, if that building is sold after completion certificate or after first occupancy, there is no levy. Right? If it is sale of land, there is no levy for sure. Undivided share of land, no GST for sure. Building, if the building is sold, if the amount is received for the building after completion certificate, after it is ready, or after first occupancy, after, if supposing you are talking about the entire complex and one of them has occupied the place, and then you go and occupy your another flat or your another shop, which means that the building is ready. If the building is ready and then sold, it is immovable property. Put in a very simple words, if the building is ready and then you pay for it, it is an immovable property, no GST. But if you paid advance when the building was being constructed, then there will be GST. If you are talking about paying advance when the building was under construction, so construction of building before, which means that you have paid advance before completion certificate or first occupancy, then there will be levy of GST, which is supply of service. Now let us even understand this clearly, point number 5, clearly with the help of an example. Now we are seeing example number 7. Example number 7. Understand that you are talking about 2 scenarios. Rather, we will take 3 scenarios. There is a place where there is a residential complex or commercial complex being constructed, where 3 persons are going to get it, right? Person number 1, person number 2 and person number 3, and each of them is required to pay say 10 crores. They are required to pay say 10 crores as a complex. Whether residential or commercial, it really doesn't make any difference as far as levy is concerned, not collection, as far as levy is concerned. Now builder or promoter is giving the advertisement well before the complex is being constructed. Now the first person pays entire 10 crores in advance, right? Second person pays 2 crores advance and he pays balance 8 crores after completion certificate or first occupancy. And the third person pays entire 10 crores after completion certificate or first occupancy, which was earlier, which means that after the building was ready. Now understand that when you talk about the first person who has paid entire 10 crores in advance, undivided share of land, See, land value will never be subject to GST. But we are not discussing valuation, what will be the land value, etc. That is actually not applicable for your exams also. But the land value is always not subject to GST. But here you are talking about construction of building or construction of that particular shop. When person number one has given entire advance to the builder or the promoter or promoter was actually doing construction for him. It was a construction service. So the building portion will be subject to GST and it will be supply of service. Friends, it is very clear. When out of 3 of you, if one of you is giving me entire advance, myself being a promoter, land value is very clear. Undivided share of land, you will be removing something from 10 crores, the land portion, that is not subject to GST. That is clearly not subject to GST. But the building portion, the balance value, will be subject to GST and it will be supply of services, because when you paid entire advance, I was doing construction for you. I was actually doing construction for you. Rather, you will be in a position to give any changes or recommendations to meet for making changes. So it is clearly subject matter of GST. And friends, things will not change if you are paid even part advance. So whether it was full advance or whether it is part advance, answer remains the same. It doesn't mean any difference. Even that advance amount was say 1 lakh instead of 2 crores, answer remains the same. When I tell answer remains the same, again you have to bifurcate. Undivided share of land, there is no GST. Land portion is immovable property, no GST. But even when you are paid 2 crores advance, understand that I was doing construction for you. Now it is construction of building. I was doing construction for you, which is again supply of service. So again clearly I was doing service for you. Clearly I was actually doing service for you. Again that is subject matter of GST. Clearly subject matter of GST. Actually there is no difference between the first person and the second person. Whether you pay full advance or partial advance, answer is the same. Remove the land portion, no GST, and the building portion is actually construction of building, which is subject matter of GST, which will be treated as supply of service. There is no change. There is absolutely no change. But when you talk about the third part, if 10 crores is paid by one of you and you have paid 10 crores after the building was ready, after completion certificate was received for the building, or after someone has occupied the place, whichever is earlier, not whichever is later, whichever is earlier. Now in this case it means that the building is ready, construction is over. Now whether it is undivided share in land or whether it is sale of building, no more I am going to call it as construction of building, sale of building, there is no GST. Because now I have used the term sale of building. In the previous 2 cases I used the term construction of building, which was actually supply of service. Now what is the common point that you see in all these 3 cases? Undivided share of land is never ever subject to GST. How to find that undivided share of land? There is a rate notification which talks about it, 1/3 of the entire value, etc., which is not applicable for exams. You just understand conceptually that land portion is not subject to GST. Out of 10 crores, land portion will never be subject to GST. And the building portion, if you are paid full advance, or partial advance, then the building is constructed for you, which means that there is construction service of building to you. It will be treated as supply of service. And if you are paid the entire 10 crores after completion certificate, then no more the builder was doing construction for you. Whether you, builder and yourself, did not have any contract, you did not knew each other. And when you came after the building was ready, the building was sold to you. When I am telling building, it's not the entire building. Part of the building was sold to you. Part of the building means a one flat or one shop was sold to you. Then it is sale of building. It is not subject to GST. So this is the understanding that you should have when you are talking about land and building. Now when you see the example, things will be very clear. Whether it is person 1, person 2 or person 3, sale of land, undivided share of land is never subject to GST. And if it is sale of building, when I tell sale of building, I was very clear with the language. entire consideration is received after or is paid after completion certificate or first occupancy, whichever is earlier, which was in scenario when you are talking about third person. When you talk about first person and second person, what happened for first person and second person? They paid advance, either full advance or partial advance. So full advance or partial advance was paid before completion certificate or first occupancy, which means then it is not sale of building, it is construction of building. It is not sale of building now, it is construction of building. That construction of building is subject to GST, and that construction, when we are going to see schedule 2, which talks about nature of supply, there it is written that it is supply of services. Supply of services, my friends. That is all about your point number 5 of schedule 3. And point number 6 of schedule 3, my friends, we have discussed well in advance. Right, while discussing something else, rather while discussing the meaning of actionable claim, we have discussing the definition of goods and services and actionable claim, we have discussed this point number 6 already. Actionable claim other than betting, gambling, lottery is not subject to GST. What it means? If it is betting, gambling, lottery, it is subject to GST. If it is other than betting, gambling, lottery, there is no GST. Actionable, we took an example, sundry debtors or your insurance claim that you receive, they are actionable claim, but they are not betting, gambling, lottery, therefore no GST. We took an example also. When you are talking about your sundry debtors or insurance claim that you are receiving, they are actually actionable claim, but there is no GST because they are actionable claim other than betting, gambling or lottery. So this point we have seen it very clearly. So example 8 was already discussed well ahead, very clearly. If you are talking about actionable claim other than betting, gambling, lottery, what is the answer? There is no GST. If you are talking about actionable claim being betting, gambling or lottery, actionable claim being betting, gambling or lottery, that is clearly GST levy is there. If it is betting, gambling, lottery, GST is applicable. Any other actionable claim other than betting, gambling, lottery, there is no GST. Right. So that completes the first 6 points of your schedule 3. Now there are last 2 points left out for schedule 3, which we are going to understand. Now the 3 points, why I am telling last 3 points. 7th point is drop shipment or merchant trading. 8th point contains 2 categories, supply of warehouse goods or high sea sales. Now how you have to understand these points? With the help of examples, we'll try to understand these points. And my friends, it will be very simple. Rather, all these 3 categories, point number 7 1 category, point number 8 2 categories, have the same logic. Now example 9, you are talking about import of goods by A Limited from USA. When the goods are imported by A Limited from USA, what is that he is going to pay? Is there supply? Yes, there is supply. He is going to pay what? Goods are being imported, my friends. So he will pay BCD plus is going to pay social welfare surcharge plus IGST. Right. And if I tell that export of goods is by A Limited to Australia, the same person A Limited imported the goods, he paid import duty, BCD, SWS plus IGST. Then he took the good, he exported the goods to Australia. Whether supply is there? Yes, my friends, IGST. But wait, exports are always zero rated. Exports are always zero rated. Zero rated means the entire chain will be tax free. Entire chain means your sale end and purchase end will be tax free. So though levy is there, you have the option of paying IGST and taking the refund of the same, or you have the option of not paying IGST and taking the refund of your input tax credit. So that will be clearly discussing in zero rating. As of now, in simple language, understand that there will be zero rating applied. That is, export can be on payment of IGST or without payment of IGST under letter of undertaking. If at all export is on payment of IGST, the exporter can apply for refund of IGST, which means that he will pay IGST, again get the refund of IGST. If at all the payment export is without payment of IGST, if at all the export is without payment of IGST, output IGST is not going to pay. Why? Export and import are always interstate, so output IGST is not going to pay. but he would have suffered tax at the time of purchase. In this case, at the time of import, he'll get refund of input tax credit. He'll get refund of input tax credit. In the previous case, he'll get refund of output IGST. In the next case, he'll get refund of input tax credit. If I were to explain this in a very simple language, though zero rating is a concept that you have to discuss later, but roughly if I were to explain you, when you are exporting, right, option 1 that you have, right, you pay IGST, you pay output IGST, and thereafter you go for refund of output IGST. Pay and get the refund. So on export you pay and get the refund. Option 2 that you have. Option 2 that you have. You export the goods or services. Right. In option 2, you export under letter of undertaking or bond. You export under letter of undertaking or bond, where you don't pay IGST. You don't pay output IGST. You are not required to pay anything on your output export. But still you have to understand that even if you don't pay output IGST, there will be certain input tax credit on purchases which is lying unutilized. In the previous case, that input tax credit would have been offset with output tax, so that is no worry. But here, the previous case, this input tax credit would have been used for output IGST, so there is no problem. But in this case, there is input tax credit, but there is no output IGST. Therefore, you will have unutilized input tax credit. You go for the refund of unutilized input tax credit, and this is nothing, my friends, this is nothing but the concept of zero rating. The entire tax chain, the purchase end and the sale end are tax free. The moment the goods are exported or the services are exported outside India, it goes with destination based consumption taxation. Now Indian government don't have any right to retain taxes, so they have to give back the taxes whatever they have collected in India, whether it is at sale point or it is at purchase point. So this is the rough understanding of what you call it as zero rating. Now my friends, if you see example 9, there's nothing new. We have already discussed when we have discussed the concept of zero rating earlier, right? Now what if I tell that example 9 could have been worked out in a different way? See, what was A Limited doing? A Limited was taking the goods from USA, paying import duty, that is BCD, social welfare surcharge and IGST, and then exporting to Australia. Export is always zero rated, so levy is there of IGST, but it is zero rated, and we have discussed how zero rating will happen. When you talk about zero rating will happen, finally all the taxes that were collected by the Indian government will be given back to the exporter. That is the understanding that you should have when you are talking about this particular point. Now what is the other option that you are having? You are talking about drop shipment. That is point number 7. Now A Limited is importing the goods from USA and exporting to Australia, but without actually bringing the goods in India. Which means that if I am A Limited, I am importing the goods from USA and I am exporting to Australia, which you have discussed just now. But wait, there's one change. I don't actually bring inside India. I directly ask my USA supplier to give the goods to my Australian customer. So there is no coming of goods in India, no going out of goods outside India. Technically there is no import, there is no export, and that is what they are trying to tell. It is not at all supply. Friends, the final conclusion will remain the same. Why? If at all you are talking about myself, A Limited, importing the goods in India from USA, actually importing goods are coming inside, I would have paid customs duty, that is BCD, SWS plus IGST. But when I am exporting the goods back to Australia, the things will be zero rated, which means that all the taxes that are paid in India by any person will be refunded back to the exporter. And we have seen the two options of zero rating, option 1 and option 2. Finally, the exporter will get all the taxes that were charged in India. Exporter will all get all the taxes. So finally, if I were to tell the conclusion of example number 9, the conclusion was finally no taxes in India. The conclusion was finally there is no taxes in India and it remains the same here. But how? They tell that it is not at all levy. If at all you talk about drop shipment, they tell that you really did not import the goods in India, you really did not export it outside. Because import and export of goods means import means bringing the goods from outside India to India. Export means taking the goods out of India from India, which means movement should be there. Now, there is no import, no export technically. So, no customs duty will be paid as it is technically not import of goods, and there is no zero rating because as technically it is not export of goods. Finally, conclusion remains the same. Whether it was example 9 or example 10, there is no taxes that is paid in India. In example 9, you have paid taxes initially, finally when you export, you get the refund. In example 10, as it is drop shipment, otherwise called as merchant trading, I was A Limited, I imported the goods from USA, exported to Australia, but without actually bringing to India. The movement was directly from USA to Australia. So what I did, being A Limited in India, I directly asked the exporter of USA to give the goods to my customer in Australia. So goods never entered inside India, and this transaction, it was technically never import and technically my sale is never export. So they are trying to tell that this is not supply. My sale now is not at all supply. So they are making this very convenient or very easy for me. As the goods are not imported, I would not have paid import duty, and as the goods are technically not exported, the zero rating concept will not apply because I never paid anything, any taxes in India. So therefore the zero rating concept will not apply. So that is what is said in this example 10, which is technically called as drop shipment. When you directly ask your supplier in USA to hand over the goods to your customer in Australia without bringing the goods in India and taking the goods outside India, the goods are actually not physically coming in India. That is drop shipment, and your sale or your export to Australian customer is not at all supply. There is no GST. But if you see the final conclusion of example 9 and example 10, you clearly find that finally there will be no taxes in India. How? Example 9, Indian government would have collected taxes initially, but when the goods are finally exported, Indian government would have refunded back all the taxes to the exporter. In example 10, Indian government don't collect any taxes, therefore there is no question of refund of taxes by the Indian government. Right? That is all about your example 9 and 10. That is completing your point number 7 of schedule 3, drop shipment or merchant trading. Now what is example 11 and example 12? Example 11, high sea sales. Example 12, sale of warehouse goods. That is exactly point number 8 of schedule 3. Now let us try to understand this. Import of goods by A Limited from USA, which means that if I am A Limited, I am importing the goods from USA. The goods are actually coming to India. A Limited is selling the goods to B Limited before such goods reaches India or before the goods are cleared for home consumption, which means that I am not clearing the goods for home consumption and I am giving the ownership. I am selling it to B Limited. To make you understand this practically, both the cases, example 11 and 12, let us take an example pictorially. Therefore, both example 11 and 12 will be clearly completed. Now, supposing you are talking about A Limited, right? A Limited of India imported the goods from USA. Right, the first place when the goods will come to India is called as custom station. It's called as custom station. The first place when the goods will be coming to India, they will be stored at custom station. Now, when the goods were at custom station or when the goods were not reaching in India or when the goods were at custom station, A Limited transferred the title or transferred the ownership to B Limited. When that transfers were happening, either before reaching custom station or before clearance from custom station. Before reaching custom station, or before clearance from custom station for home consumption, the goods were given to B Limited, which means that B Limited will go to customs station and clear the goods. B Limited will go to customs station and clear the goods. B Limited will clear the goods. So there are two transactions, transaction 1 and transaction 2. Right. So B Limited is going to clear the goods, and when B Limited is going to clear the goods, B Limited will file bill of entry for home consumption. Now understand that, first you have to understand that who is the real importer. Who is the real importer? Whether you are talking about importer being A Limited or importer being B Limited. Who is the importer? Importer is not A Limited, importer is B Limited. Only that person, my friends, who is clearing the goods for home consumption is the actual importer. So B Limited is the importer. When B Limited is the importer, and that is the only reason B Limited is going to file a customs document called as bill of entry for home consumption. So when B Limited is the importer, B Limited will pay import duty. B Limited will pay import duty at the time of clearance from customs station. What will be the import duty breakup, my friends? Import duty breakup will be BCD plus SWS plus IGST. So B Limited will pay import duty. Now that is not the question. Now actually the question focuses on what? The question focuses on the transaction between A Limited and B Limited. What about the transaction between A Limited and B Limited when A Limited has sold the goods to B Limited? Now they are trying to tell that this transaction between A Limited and B Limited is not supply. Therefore, A Limited, when he is selling the goods to B Limited, is not required to pay any GST. A Limited will not pay. A Limited will not pay. So when you talk about this A Limited as a person, A Limited will not pay customs duty as per Customs Act. A Limited will also not pay GST. A Limited will also not pay GST. So A Limited is not going to pay anything. He is not the real importer, therefore he is not going to pay customs duty. So A Limited will not pay customs duty. A Limited will not pay GST. A Limited will not pay customs duty on his import. A Limited will not pay GST on his sale. So A Limited does not pay customs duty on his import purchase. A Limited will not pay GST on his sales to B Limited. Sales to B Limited. They are making the transaction of A Limited tax free. Why? Because technically import is done only and only by B Limited. So when they are very clear that okay, B Limited is only starting the transaction in India. Before that A Limited, they are leaving A Limited. So A Limited is not paying tax both at his purchase point, that is import, and at a sale point to be limited, because technically the goods are not imported. Only after import completes, GST Act will be applicable. I'll repeat, only after import completes, GST Act will be applicable. So that is what is the conclusion here. Now when you talk about warehouse goods, there is no big difference, right? A Limited of India is importing the goods from USA, right? The goods reaches customs station. The next place that the goods can go in customs is customs warehouse. So A Limited took the goods from customs station to customs warehouse, and when the goods were in customs warehouse, A Limited transferred the title to B Limited of India. When the goods were in customs warehouse, A Limited transferred the title to B Limited of India when the goods are actually in customs warehouse. Now again you have to ask a question. Who is the actual importer as per Customs Act? Who is the actual importer as per Customs Act? whether it is A limited or whether it is B limited. A limited rather has filed a document called as bill of entry for warehousing. Who has filed the document? A limited, for taking the goods from customs station to customs warehouse. Just remember that he has filed some customs document, bill of entry for warehousing, to take the goods from customs station to customs warehouse. Now who is the actual importer as per Customs Act? I am giving you the conclusion. Understanding of that will be there in a different place. Who is the actual importer? Who is the actual importer? The actual importer again is not A limited, it is B limited. Why? B limited will go to customs warehouse and clear the goods. So it is B limited who is going to go to customs warehouse and file bill of entry for home consumption. Who will file it? B limited will file it. For what? For clearing the goods for home consumption. So who is the real importer? It is again B limited who is the actual importer. It is again B limited who is the actual importer. So what B limited will pay? B limited will pay import duty at the time of clearance from warehouse, customs warehouse. Clearance for what? Clearance is obviously for home consumption. Now what is the breakup of import duty that B limited is going to pay? Again it is BCD plus SWS plus IGST. Again friends, understand that is not a subject matter of our discussion. Our discussion actually is about A limited sales to B limited. This is our discussion, and purchase from USA. So our discussion is about A limited only. What about purchase of A limited and what about sale of A limited? A limited will not pay any customs duty. A limited will not pay any customs duty at the time of import because technically it is not import. And A limited, import is not yet over. Import is over only when the goods are cleared by B limited from customs warehouse. A limited will also not pay any GST for his sales to B limited. So A limited will not pay customs duty at the time of import. A limited will not pay GST at the time of sales. Now this is what we are going to call it as sale of warehouse goods. Why? Again the same understanding. Import is over only and only when the goods are cleared by B limited for home consumption. And before import is over, you cannot have GST applicable. Only once import is over, you can have application of GST Act. And before import is over, you cannot have application of GST Act. Therefore, what are they trying to tell? They are trying to tell the same thing that we have discussed above. A limited will not pay customs duty at the time of his import. Technically it was not import. And A limited will also not pay GST for his sales to B limited. And this particular transaction where they tell that A limited is not going to pay GST for his sales to B limited, they are talking about not being called as supply. Not being called as supply because of your schedule 3. It was also not being, this was also not being called as supply because of your schedule 3. Now if you look at both the examples, now if you compare both the examples, this is called as high C sales. The first example was called as high C sales, which means when the goods are yet to reach customs station or when the goods are at customs station, A limited has transferred the title or ownership to B limited. And the second example is called as sale of warehoused goods. In both the cases, there is one thing which is very common. You can find one thing very common. What is that common point? Importer in both the cases was B limited, right? And import is over only when B limited is clearing the goods either from customs station or from customs warehouse. And B limited is the person who is going to pay customs duty, that is BCD plus SWS plus IGST. And before import is over, there cannot be GST applicable. And in both the cases, A limited is not paying anything. A limited is not paying anything on his import. He is not paying any customs duty on his import. and A Limited is not paying any GST on its sales. So in both the cases, A Limited does not pay customs duty on its import and GST on sales to B Limited. A Limited is not paying customs duty on import and GST on sales to B Limited. Both at purchase point and sales point, A Limited is tax free. It is not paying anything because of this not supply schedule 3, which is point number 8A and point number 8B. Now if you look at this example 11 and example 12, things will be very simple. The same thing is given there in the example. Now let us see this example 11. Import of goods by A Limited from USA. However, A Limited sells the goods to B Limited either before the goods are reaching India or before the goods are cleared for home consumption from customs station. Correct. Now in this case, A Limited is not going to pay anything. There is no supply. A Limited does not pay customs duty. A Limited does not pay customs duty on his purchases. A Limited will not pay GST on his sales. Now B Limited purchases the goods and B Limited is taking the goods for home consumption from customs station. So who is going to pay taxes? B Limited will pay the taxes. And what will be the taxes that B Limited will pay? Will pay BCD plus SWS plus IGST because it is import of goods by B Limited. And the same thing is given in example 12. Same thing that we have understood pictorially. The same thing is given in terms of example 11 and 12. We have understood it very clearly with pictorial presentation. The goods are imported by A Limited from USA. However, A Limited takes the goods from customs station to customs warehouse. And from there he sells the goods to B Limited when the goods are at customs warehouse, which means that he is not clearing the goods for home consumption. When the goods are at customs warehouse, he is giving the title to B Limited. Understand that A Limited does not pay customs duty at the time of purchase because technically it is not import. A Limited is not going to pay GST at the time of sales because it is called as not supply in terms of schedule 3. Now purchase of goods by B Limited. Purchase of goods by B Limited, and B Limited is a person who is going to customs warehouse and taking the goods for home consumption. So B Limited goes to customs warehouse, files a document called as bill of entry for home consumption and takes the goods. Who? B Limited. So who is the real importer, my friends? B Limited was the real importer both in example 11 and example 12. So who will pay taxes? B Limited. What taxes? As it is import of goods, it will be customs duty. I think till now we have discussed this customs duty a minimum of 15 times, right? So he'll pay customs duty minimum BCD plus SWS plus IGST. So the real importer is B Limited because only B Limited is clearing the goods for home consumption. See, whether it is customs station or customs warehouse, it really doesn't make any difference. The point is who's the real importer of the goods. That person who clears the goods for home consumption or that person who files bill of entry for home consumption, right? Now in both the example that person was B Limited, and B Limited being the real importer will pay the customs duty, that is BCD SWS plus IGST. Now what about A Limited in both the cases? A Limited in both the cases, that is example 11 and example 12. Example 11, A Limited sold the goods when the goods were at customs station. Example 12, A Limited sold the goods when the goods were at customs warehouse. In both the cases, A Limited on his purchase point will not pay import duty because technically it is not import. Import is not yet over. Import is over only when the goods are cleared for home consumption. So technically A Limited will not pay import duty because it is technically not import of goods. It is not yet over. A Limited will also not pay any GST on its sales because of schedule 3 not supply. I'll repeat, A Limited is having both the ends, purchase and sale and tax free. A Limited does not pay its import duty because import of goods is not yet over. So our purchase point is not paying any customs duty. A Limited is not paying any GST when he is selling the goods to B Limited, whether the goods are lying at customs station, example 11, or whether the goods are lying at customs warehouse, example 12. Why he is not paying that? Because it is mentioned in schedule 3, point number 8. Schedule 3, point number 8. And if you want to understand the logic why it is mentioned in schedule 3, point number 8, why it is called as not supply, the reason is you cannot have GST being made applicable before import is over. Import will be over only by B Limited. So import is yet to be over. and therefore A Limited is not taxed. A Limited is not taxed at the purchase end, no customs duty. A Limited is not taxed at the sales end to B Limited, whether the goods are sold when they are lying at customs station or whether the goods are sold when they are lying at customs warehouse. And because of Schedule 3, it is not taxed. So there is no GST, no import duty on purchase, no GST on sales. So A Limited's transaction in both the cases is tax free. So he is tax free. When you talk about high C sales, high C sales is a sales when the goods are yet to reach customs station or the goods have reached customs station and then A Limited transfers the title to B Limited. That is technically high C sales. Or when you are talking about sale of warehouse goods, which means that A Limited has imported the goods and the goods have reached customs station. From customs station, the goods have gone to customs warehouse. Import is not yet over. Right, and when the goods are lying at customs warehouse, A Limited has handed over the title or ownership to B Limited. So whether it is high C sales or sale of warehouse goods, the answer for A Limited remains the same. The last time I am repeating, A Limited's answer for both high C sales and sale of warehouse goods is the same. A Limited will not pay any import duty at the time of purchase because import is not yet over, and A Limited will not pay any GST for the sale to B Limited when the goods are at customs station, high C sales, or when the goods are at customs warehouse, sale of warehouse goods. Why? Because that is mentioned in Schedule 3. Why it is mentioned in Schedule 3? Because there cannot be GST before import is over. So that is all about your Schedule 3 8 points. Now if you look at all these examples and all these points, you will find all the points are clearly covered. What were the 8 points that we have discussed? Point number 1 was employer-employee. Point number 2 was MP MLAs. Point number 3 was court and tribunal. Point number 4 was deceased. Point number 5 was land and building, and point number 6 was actionable claim. So these are all normal 6 points. You should read them as 6 plus 2. These are all normal 6 points. Plus 2 points dealing with customs. 2 points dealing with something to do with customs. What were those 2 points? Point number 7 was drop shipment or merchant trading. Without bringing the goods into India, you import the goods from USA and you export it to Australia, but you don't bring the goods inside India. Directly you ask your USA supplier to hand over the goods to Australian customer. That is drop shipment or merchant trading, which is not supply. And the last point, point number 8 was high C sales or sale of warehouse goods. If you see the last 2 points, whenever you talk about the last 2 points, A Limited, whether it is drop shipment or supply of warehouse goods or high C sales, A Limited did not pay customs duty on his purchases, and A Limited did not pay GST on his sales. So that's a common thing in point number 7, point number 8A and point number 8B. What is that? A Limited did not pay customs duty because he never was the importer technically, right? So on his purchase point, this was on his purchase point, and on his sale point, A Limited never paid GST. So if I were to tell the summary of point number 7 and 8A, 8B, this would be the summary of point number 7 and point number 8A and 8B. That A Limited's purchase and sales are tax free. He did not pay customs duty on his purchase, and he is not paying the GST on his sales. Why is not paying GST on his sales? Because of Schedule 3. Point number 7 and point number 8 of Schedule 3 that we have discussed. So that completes our understanding of not supply. Friends, we have clearly, thoroughly seen not supply part 1, which talks about 5 notified cases to be read as 2 plus 3, and part 2, which is talking about Schedule 3 8 cases, which is to be read as 6 plus 2. Now this technically completes the meaning of supply. Supply, which was equal to actual supply, thoroughly covered, plus deemed supply part 1 part 2 thoroughly covered, minus not supply part 1 part 2 thoroughly covered. What is left out is only now nature of supply, which will be answered by Schedule 2. What is left out is not supply. What is left out is only nature of supply. Whether the supply, once it is clear that it is supply, the next question to be asked is whether it is supply of goods or whether it is supply of services. So that portion, nature of supply, is the only thing that is left out now in supply.